The most common mistake for young players, I think, is
life as a footballer is busy to say the least. Away from the pitch, players have a lot of business that needs to be taken care of. This is where football agents come in.
There's a lot of people thinking, well, you know, I love football, I'm great, so I'm going to be a great agent. And it doesn't, it doesn't really work like that.
Contracts, transfers, endorsement deals. Agents are a crucial part of the modern game. But, as everyone knows, the industry has had its fair share of controversy in recent years. According to FIFA, football clubs spent a whopping £701 million on agency fees in 2023 alone. What's scarier is that figure is 43% more than what they spent in 2022. To say the industry is growing would be an understatement.
It's the expectation that's built. Chew these kids up and you spit them out around the 2002 born generation and younger, when we started to see like a really big difference.
In 2019, Jay-Z's business, Roc Nation, decided to enter the football agency industry. With years of experience as an agent, Redmond became Roc Nation's head of global football.
The really, really top players, they're not even focused on the pack, they're just focused on themselves getting better.
Superstars such as Kevin De Bruyne, Vincius Junior, and many more are now Roc Nation clients.
I still think he's nowhere near his potential. I think he'd be the best striker in the world.
We sat down with Alan to find out the truth. What is it really like being a football agent for some of the world's biggest stars?
The number one problem facing young players is complacency, I would say. You're one bad tackle away from really not playing anymore. Hi, I'm Alan Redmond. I'm Executive Vice President and the Global Head of Football for Roc Nation Sports International. I'm here today to do perspectives for rising ballers.
In your own words, can you explain what a football agent does and what your role in a player's career is?
I get asked a lot what on earth a football agent actually does, and it's a perfectly valid question. I think if you trace it back, it's contracts. You're doing a contract renewal for a player at his existing club, or you're transferring him to another club. So that's the backbone of it. But I guess as time has moved, there's a little bit more that gets added over time. So for example, our agency, we would usually manage a player's social media account, got a media department, we've got a charity and philanthropy department. And I guess alongside all of those things, probably one of the traditional things that's still there as well is you end up being the player's confidant, and you end up speaking to the player daily, weekly, and just being their counsel, really, as well as the more dry experience of going through contracts and making sure they're okay to sign. But negotiation and contracts is where it begins and ends.
Great. Can you give us a bit of an idea about your background? Like, where did it all start for you? How did your career start in football? Start as early as you wish to start?
Well, I think you probably have to go back very far, because if you're going to work in football and you're going to persevere with it, there has to be a seed. There has to be like an origin of why you're so driven to do it. And for me, I was just obsessed with football as a kid. I would pack a football going on a family holiday. I'm not joking. I played for my local team from Dublin, played for my local team. The youngest age group was under 10. I started at 6 years of age and couldn't get a kick. At 7, still couldn't really get a kick. And then around 8, started to play a little bit more. But I was just obsessed with it. Every meal I would have reading Match or Shoot magazine. And so I guess that was probably the start of just love of football. The first couple of World Cups I remember, Ireland didn't qualify, but I remember following Brazil. I really liked that they'd be specifically 82 and 86 World Cups. I was just obsessed with the Brazilian team. And so I guess that's what gave me the love of football. I played other sports as well, but football was always the one that was the obsession. And then every boy who likes football thinks he's going to be a player, would love to be a player. And by about age 14, it was very clear to me that I was not going to make any money from playing football. More chance someone would pay me to stop playing. So I think at that stage, I wouldn't even have been aware that there was another way to work in football if you weren't a player or a coach. So, that was that. I continued playing football, and even adult life, played five-a-side a few times a week and so on. And then when I went to university, I went to Cardiff University, and one of my friends at Cardiff University was a guy called Nicky Steen, and Nicky's dad was Mel Steen, who was one of the most influential agents and one of the original agents in the UK. And occasionally I'd see Mel, and I probably used to bug the hell out of him, but I would always ask him questions because I hadn't even, that was the first time I heard of the profession of a football agent. And then I suppose that was the seed of the agency. Though, I didn't know that was a thing. That's interesting. So you do this for them, and you'd also do that for them, and then I kind of went away and did other things. I started a company. I've always spoken languages, so I speak Spanish, Italian, and French. And I started a company that we did everything really. We used to do subtitles for independent films. We used to translate instruction manuals for everything from toasters to canoes.
And how old were you at that point when you started that company?
I guess 20s. And then we used to do, we started to do, as I suppose about 7 or 8 years into the company, we started to do a lot of football related stuff. So we started doing work permit exams for non-EU players. And then over the next probably 3 or 4 years, a lot of the stuff I was doing was very football specific. I was asked by the Premier League to be a consultant. So alongside doing work for Liverpool, Everton, Stoke, Bolton and Wigan, and Stoke, Bolton and Wigan were in the Premier League at that point as well. I was a consultant to the Premier League, didn't just to go to, it was a few meetings a year, and it was revolving around policy and education and things like that. Around that time, personally, my role within the company was just football. Around about that time for several years actually thereafter. And the thought crossed my mind that this is kind of agency work that I was doing at times. And then a good friend of mine who was a technical director for a Premier League club, every time I saw him, he said, "You need to do the FIFA exam," pushing me. And so I did, and did the exam, the old exam, passed it, and then moved full-time into agency and sold my half of the other company because there would have been a conflict of interest really. So that's it really. I think it's the love of football. I know what the root of it was very clearly. And then the agency, it was Mel who passed away last year. It was a really nice man, but he wouldn't even maybe be aware that he was the inspiration for me becoming an agent, but that's the reality. Yeah, I just started working for myself. So I had quite good contacts at certain clubs, and I had a good knowledge of the industry. I think what I'd been doing over the previous years had given me a good indication into how not to do it, because I was dealing with a lot of agents, and some were good, some really weren't, but I never had a feeling that was something that I couldn't do, and in fact, often I thought I could do that better. So and look, the old FIFA exam, it's quite a tricky exam. And I was committed to that, studied for it, passed it the first time. And so by the time I'd come through that, I thought, no, I was sure that was what I wanted to do. Listen, there's risk involved because you move into something that you haven't, previously done. Although, as I say, I hadn't done it, but I'd kind of been in or around it for several years, and I had a good knowledge of it.
So how did you go about picking up your first clients from there?
First clients, I guess I was quite lucky, and the first clients came to me. They were people I'd known, or somebody at a club had recommended them and told them to come to me. So I was okay in that respect. But I mean, from the start, and for anybody really who wants to get into agency, you've got to watch a lot of games, like a lot. And I think the other thing as well is, it's important not to try to throw your arms around the world, because you won't succeed. So what I mean is, it's good to specialize. So if you're going to a game in Manchester one day and Norwich another and Middlesbrough another, you're going to know like a microscopic amount about everything. So I tended to have 3 or 4 clubs that I watched a lot of. And so then after the 6-month period, you're really familiar with everything. The first team, all of the best under 16s, and you have a good idea in your head of the succession plan. And because you're going to games, your face is familiar, you start to know people and that. So, I would say for anyone wanting to get into agency, it's probably a good idea to specialize rather than to kind of spread yourself too thinly, because you won't impact anywhere really.
So where were you sort of specialising at the time?
I really liked Arsenal's academy.
Okay.
So I was going to Arsenal's academy as much as possible. I made a decision early on that, if I was going to do this, I wanted to do it properly. So I wanted to try and stay working with players that kind of understood the level really clearly. I didn't, and it could be fair criticism for doing this. I didn't want to do anything in non-league. Didn't, because I just thought if I go into that, I may never come out of that. So I tried to keep the bar high, and really just going to a lot of international tournaments, going to watch some of the better academy teams play, just picked up clients. I think obviously at that time I was a one-man band, and there were some enormous companies in the industry. So the fair question then is, how can you compete against them? But I think what you tend to do is use what they would perceive their strength to be as their weakness, which I still think it is. It's, if you've got several hundred players, how are you going to spread your attention across them? I don't believe you can, or at least it's very difficult. So I think the service I was giving players was very full on. They were, it was, when you sign a player, very often you sign a family, because you spend so much time with the family, and the journey of the player it's kind of the journey of the family. It's occasionally you'll get a player who the family are not so engaged in his career, but generally it becomes just part of the family's story and their daily lives. So yeah, I always had a good rapport with families. I was like to study, for example, to pass the exam, you got to know your FIFA statutes and regulations and your FA ones. But I always like to stay on top of that, because I hated the idea of someone asking me a question I didn't know the answer. And I just thought, if someone asked me a question, I don't know the answer to that, then they'd be perfectly justified going with another agent. I never liked the idea of saying, "Oh, check that, back to you." So, so I think knowing your stuff, being personable, and actually, rather than just getting someone's number and speculatively hitting them, if you're speaking to a family and you're speaking to a player, and they know that authentically you're familiar and that you can see probably the same as them where his career should go, everything works out, and they buy into you and they trust you, and it's mutual. I would say that what often happens as an independent is, when you start to get a couple of players who hit a certain level, certain threshold of quality, the bigger agencies attempt to come and take your players. I was quite fortunate. I never lost a player to a big agency. So I think what happens then is the bigger agencies think, well, we'll take him. But again, I was never really tempted by that. I think a couple of the the people who established them have done unbelievable. They've changed the business in this country. I think they've done amazing jobs, but that doesn't mean I wanted to work for them.
You've sort of gone down a bit of a topic I wanted to ask you about in that sort of period of your career. So what were, like, obviously we've spoken about competition, establishing yourself as a one-man band kind of thing. But when you reflect, what were like the main challenges you experienced in that era?
Trying to be two places at once,
Really?
just trying to, like I kind of, it wasn't like I had the 10 commandments or anything like this, but I did have certain things that I set in place for myself. So for example, I wouldn't sign two players the same age group in the same position. And there were a couple of opportunities where I could potentially have made nice commissions, but I wouldn't do it, because my feeling was always, at their club, the players have enough competition. The last thing they want is competition within their agency, so I tried to stick to that. But, no, I would say that, I don't want to oversimplify, but I've never found the job, I've never found it overly challenging. I've always felt that I'm ready for the challenge, and I've always felt that I know what I'm doing, which I guess is a good way to be. You look at a player like Vini Jr, and he's going to improve every year for the next several years. In my experience, the really, really top players, they understand what they have to do. Occasionally, if a player doesn't really fulfill his potential, sometimes the potential was incredible, but if you know how the player lived.
Yeah, definitely. So can we sort of fast forward to where you're at now? Can you describe your role at the moment, what you're doing now?
Yeah, so I came over to Roc Nation in September of 2020, so 3.5 years ago exactly. And Roc Nation have been incredibly successful in music, and they've been incredibly successful in US sports. And Michael Jormark, the president of Roc Nation, he had Roc Nation Sports. He had a vision to come to Europe and move into football. And he took meetings with various people, and a couple of them recommended that he have a chat with myself, and that was really the starting point of it.
And
So
you were running your own agency at the time.
yeah, I guess the thing for us at Roc Nation is, like I said to you previously, there are a lot of big agencies, as in big in numbers, big in name, and also big in the number of clients. The Roc brand is obviously very powerful. It's a huge responsibility. It's a big brand, but actually, as an agency, we don't want massive numbers. We want to keep it like an exclusive group. We want to keep like a boutique nature to it. So for us, it's a case of managing that, and at the same time expanding, but it's expanding intelligently, so that we're not just going into another territory and doing the very obvious thing. We're just trying to make sure that everything we do is strategically in keeping with what we're doing everywhere else. And we'll continue to do that. 24 is going to be a year of growth for us as well. Probably move into another couple of territories. Last year was Brazil, which has been, exceptionally successful. But just, I guess with Roc Nation, what we're trying to do is have a level of service that, perhaps hasn't been seen or experienced by clients. I touched upon earlier, there's a charity and philanthropy department. I mean, it's just one small department of the company, but I don't know of another agency that has that or even would have that. So, because I think it's easy, we have a commercial department that does a lot of work with a lot of brand deals and endorsement deals for our clients. But I think that just to even consider, the side where players might want to give back to the community. I mean, it's not it's not a revenue generating part of the company, but it's one of the most important parts of the company for us, because you sign a person, it's a person who plays football, but if that person has ambitions to give back to his community, we want to put steps in place to enable.
So you sort of mentioned in the past, big name agencies that approached you and stuff like that. Why was the Roc opportunity different?
I guess because I guess it was a fresh start. Roc were not known for football, and while you could say, well, they're not traditionally a football company, but that's actually the thing I liked, because I was very aware of the company. I was aware of some of the artists. I was aware of some of their athletes. I thought it was a very strong brand. Then when I met Michael Jormark, he's very compelling, and just how he explained, what they wanted to do and how they wanted to really change the nature of football representation and how it's delivered. And yeah, that was really, it was just a chance to do things differently. I also felt that with certain agencies, if they had 600, 700, 800 players, you always want your work to mean something. And I don't necessarily know what going to an agency of that size and signing player number 726 means, so it was just the fact that we could, start this voyage together with Roc Nation and move into football and really try to make a dent in the industry. And I'm really pleased how it's gone.
I can imagine, like, because it's such a big brand in the US, I imagine people think, when you tell them about the opportunity, they think like, oh, that's, quite an easy route for a brand like that to establish itself in football. But it's actually, I imagine that's a bit of a misconception. Has it been challenging taking a big brand into a completely new area?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you have, it doesn't matter who the brand is, when you move into something new, you're not known for that. So, the job I had was really to work alongside Michael to make us known for that as quickly as possible. And you can't fake it. It's not, you can't take out adverts it's not authentic. No one's buying that. So it's just your work. And I think the other thing as well is, we had, before going over to Roc Nation, 10 years of working alongside a lot of clubs and working with clubs and gaining the trust. So it wasn't like it was this, completely new. The name of the company was new in the sport, but some of the constituent parts weren't, and they were well known.
Can you talk us through some of the players that are signed to Roc Nation now, and in what capacity you work with them?
So we represent players like Vini Jr, Endrick, who's scored the winner. I'm sure much to your disgust the other night against England. Gabriel Martinelli, Federico Dimarco, Chris Richards, and a really nice cross section. The way we try to do it really is every year sign around 8 or 10 of the best emerging players, and then
Which is very selective, by the way. Right?
Yeah, it really is. And then 1, 2, or 3 more established first team players. But that's really the way we're going to grow, and that's even in other territories, that's how we will grow as well.
So how you've got different ends of the spectrum there. You've got superstars like Vini Jr at the top end, and then you've got up and coming academy players at the other end of the spectrum. How do you guys split your time between those different clients?
Yeah, so very often what you find is, in terms of balancing first team players and academy players, very often the ones who need more of your time are the academy players. When a guy is, for example, 26 years of age and he's playing week in, week out, you need to be there, but you need to be there for different reasons. There could be something in the personal life, there could be something professional life. The commercial department would be busy trying to find endorsement opportunities for a 26-year-old with first team career. With the academy players, there's a lot more uncertainty. There's decisions over whether they're going to stay, whether they're going to go, are they going to get pushed to the first team, are they going to stay in the 18s or the 20s? So it's a completely different set of considerations. But I think by keeping the client roster pretty tight, we're able to balance that really well.
You've obviously spent quite a lot of your career around elite footballers. What do you think, in your opinion, separates the best players from the good players?
So in my experience, the really, really top players, they understand what they have to do. So sometimes a player turns up to training and he does what he has to do at training. But the really good ones, they understand that, maybe that's not enough. They understand, they're very acutely aware of weaknesses they might need to work on. And they're very aggressive and enthusiastic about just improving all the time. And honestly, occasionally if a player doesn't really fulfill his potential, sometimes the potential was incredible, but if you know how the player lived, not that it was he was a chaotic player at all, but just sometimes football can be a little bit of a dead heat. There's a lot of very good players, but the ones who are really applying themselves, they will fly higher than the ones who don't. I think at our company, if you look at a player like Federico Dimarco, and I would argue he's probably Inter Milan's best attacking player last season, although he's a wing back. Nobody could defend against him. He was running into space in the opposition penalty area, and his supposed marker was nowhere to be seen. He was just very difficult to play against. But I think that his game intelligence is what's given him a huge advantage. Remember, he's a player at 5 loans. So it wasn't just directly from the Primavera into the first team. He had 5 loans. But he wasn't shaken at any point. He was like, I'm an Inter player, and had the strength of vision. And at any time where maybe there was a bit of a challenge, he was like, well, how am I going to meet it? So you look at a player like Vini Jr, and Vini is everything from his daily schedule to the recovery work he does, to his diet. Everyone will get injuries from time to time, but he will have fewer. than most, because the regime he has in place is it's phenomenal. And again, you look at, he signed for Real Madrid, and he signed for Real Madrid in or around the same time that Eden Hazard went there. But if you were playing in that position, you probably think, well, I'm buried. Eden Hazard's arrived for 100 and whatever it was, 15 million. But he's just blossomed. And I still think he's nowhere near his potential. I think he's frightening talent, and he's going to improve every year for the next several years.
It's a scary thought.
It is. For defenders, it is. Yeah. Even a player like Chris Richards. Chris had come from Bayern Munich to the Premier League to Crystal Palace. He did a loan at Hoffenheim, came to Crystal Palace. And he's just such an impressive person. Forget football, just people he speaks to. He just leaves an impact. He leaves a mark with them. But he needed to hit the gym and work on strength, and he just totally committed to it. And I think when we scout a player, you end up meeting the player, and sometimes you scout a player and you speak with them, you think, oh, I'm not sure this is exactly for us. But with Chris, I loved him as a player, but then we actually met him, you couldn't love the guy more. It's just an unbelievable professional.
This is important, I guess. As an agent, you have to have personal relationships with your players, right? It's not just about rating them as footballers.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of agencies are the same. Maybe they're not, but for me, the actual character and the personality is enormous, because you got to work together. And we have had occasions where there was a player who, in theory, was coming on board, but we blocked it. We just thought, no, it's not the right personality. It's going to want a lot of our time and really give very little in return. So I think it's important that when you're growing the agency, that you're not just looking at yourself, that you're looking at your other clients and the I guess the happiness of your other clients, and you're trying to run a successful ship, but a stable one.
Yeah, for sure. So obviously you're working with some of the biggest names in the world in football. It must be pretty hectic.
Yes.
Can you sort of take us through like an average working week for you? Is there a lot of traveling involved? How would a week pan out?
Yeah. So last week I was in New York on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Now that's not a weekly occurrence or even a monthly occurrence, but was invited by Andy Mitchell, the CEO of Serie A North America, to speak at their offices in New York about the growth of Italian football in America, and the growth of the kind of resurgence of Italian football, which I'm really passionate about, Italian football. And I think there is a really strong resurgence. So I was there while I was in New York. We have an office in New York, so I took a lot of internal meetings. I went to New York City FC. I met with the sporting director, I met with the coach, and I met with Keith Parks, who's a client of ours who plays for New York City FC. There was a conference on in New York. I attended a couple of panels at that, took some meetings with some of the people who were there. I arrived back into London on Thursday. I had straight into meetings in relation to 2 potential transfers this summer, and then an afternoon of calls. We had 5 players in the Brazilian squad, the game against England at the weekend. So we had a lot of Brazilian families arriving. We took some of them out for dinner on Thursday night. Then Friday, a meeting in relation to a transfer, a meeting with a player and family about recruiting the player to our agency. Spent a lot of time on Friday with the families of the Brazilian players. And then Saturday, again, a little bit of entertaining the Brazilians. Went to see England against Brazil. It was a good experience for us. Endrick scored the winner. Sunday spent a bit of time at home. It's my son's 16th birthday, so it's just been a hectic week. It was nice to have a little bit of time together. And then yesterday I was at Manchester City negotiating a professional contract for Seth Chinguaro, who is a young midfield player, under 16 player of ours at Manchester City. And back to London early this morning. So it's one of those professions where it's as busy as you make it. And if you're not busy, you won't last long. And you have to, and when I say busy, you don't want to do busy work. You need to make sure that the stuff you're doing is worthwhile. You want to make sure that if you're going to games, there's a strategic reason for going to those games. One thing I try not to do is arrange a meeting with a sporting director if I've really got nothing to discuss, nothing strong to discuss. We're all busy. And it's kind of a waste of my time and their time. So, you stay in touch with people, you'll see them at games, you'll send them a WhatsApp. But in terms of actually having a meeting, it's always better if they associate you with actually having something tangible to add to their squad.
So not a very busy week then, pretty relaxed.
No. I had the feet up most of it. With Endrick, felt a bit bad actually because I think he'd be the best striker in the world. You need to go to Turkey tomorrow, 4 years, and it has to be tomorrow or it won't happen. I think in terms of transfers, one of the things that we always try to do is make sure that your players exist in the market.
You sort of touched on how you think Vini Junior's career could progress. When did you first come across Endrick, and where do you see his arc going?
So Endrick was recruited and signed by Fred Penna, who's the head of Roc Nation Sports Brazilian office. And the first time I came across him was when I was in the early stages of researching Roc Nation actually being an entity in Brazil. I went down in 2022. I spent a week in Brazil, and I had a bunch of meetings with agencies, but I had them kind of in order of preference. And the first one was to meet with Fred Penna. Got on very well with Fred to the point that it made the other agency meetings I had while I was down there kind of futile, because I was thinking, like, nice guy, not a bad stable players, but it's not Fred. Yeah. So, but I had a meeting at Palmeiras with the coach, Abel Ferreira, and his coaching team. And while I was there, they said to me, if you want to watch a bit of the session today, this young academy boy is going to train, and it's crazy talent. And as I went outside, I saw Fred in the car park, and Fred said, I'm here today. We're going to do the contract for this young player we have here. He's a crazy talent. And it turned out to be one and the same person. So that was my first experience of Endrick. I think later on that summer, then he ended up coming to the UK and he played. No, he didn't come to the UK. He played in France for Brazil against England, demolished them. And then we ended up acquiring Brazilian agency, which is now part of Roc Nation Sports International. And happy to say Endrick is a part of our family, although for the recruitment and signing of Endrick, the credit is Fred Penna and his team in Brazil.
Fantastic. How far can Endrick go, do you think?
I think he'd be the best striker in the world. I think he's with Endrick. I felt a bit bad actually because he's Brazilian. Everyone has a Brazilian comparison. So people were saying he's like Romario and players like this. And for me, he just really reminds me of Wayne Rooney. Yeah. He's just the same thing. I remember being at Everton games when he came off the bench, when he was coming through, and just the crowd lifted. And he just, without really saying or doing anything, you just know he means business. You know he's there to impact the game. And similar-ish build, incredibly powerful strike, total fearlessness from a really early age. So the player that he really reminds me of a lot is Wayne Rooney.
Brilliant. Slightly off topic now. How do transfers work? From a behind-the-scenes perspective, someone that's in the world,
Well, they don't always work. No, they usually do. And the work starts well in advance. I would say, sometimes I remember I think it was January, maybe the January 2019 window was a very busy one for me in terms of transfers. But in terms of actual being active, it was quite sedate because everything was done in advance. Now, it isn't always like that. Sometimes you will be speaking to a club or clubs about a player for 6 to 12 months beforehand. And you have a clear indication a lot of the time that the player's going to move, and he's going to go to club A, B, or C. And then sometimes 3 months before the window, you go, well, it's going to be club A. You can have surprises in the transfer window. Sometimes you have a player who really has no intention of moving, who another club sells a player, and all of a sudden your guy is in the market and somebody wants to sign him. So there is no other profession really like it in the sense that in the January window, we had an offer for a player, and it was the day before deadline day, and it was going from the UK to a 4-year deal for a team based in Istanbul. Now, it's such a strange thing. I mean, in any other profession, for somebody to contact you and say, you need to go to Turkey tomorrow, 4 years, and it has to be tomorrow or it won't happen. It's a shock to the system. And I think it's something that players who've had a transfer young in their career maybe get more accustomed to. But the timing isn't right. And again, you sign a person who plays football. It's not only a footballing entity. So you've got to take into account that the player has family, he's got a life, and it isn't always just as simple as a footballing decision. There's usually a lot of other factors that go into it. But I think in terms of transfers, one of the things that we always try to do is make sure that your players exist in the market. And when I say they exist in the market, it's that the good work isn't hidden away. So there's been, in the last few years, and probably forever, there's been a situation where occasionally you have family as an agent. And sometimes it works really well. I think the one time that it probably doesn't work well is when it's time for a player to move. Because I think that while the family can do a lot, it's given that visibility to the market of the player. And there's also, even for some very good players, there's a sense of bias at times. If I'm telling a sporting director that that this player will change his squad, it's exactly what he needs for a certain position, if he's familiar with the player, it seems quite credible. If I'm telling him about this player who's going to transform his team, and the player is my son, just in some part, you lose a little bit of credibility. That's been my experience, at least a little. And also, as part of an agency, you are in daily conversations with decision makers in the industry, which as a parent, perhaps you're not. So I understand perfectly why families very often want to do it, but I think that in most cases, probably better off working alongside an agency.
In your answer, you spoke about like sporting directors and decision makers at clubs. Can people watching at home may not have like the best idea of like how club hierarchies are set up. Can you give us a bit of a breakdown of how, there's a board, there's a chairman, sporting director, technical director? How does that all work?
So the board of a club, I guess their brief is to set the long-term plan for the club. They have to be aware of, what division they're going to be in, they're going to set a budget, long-term things such as a stadium renewal or moving to another stadium. So making sure that the club is sustainable over a long period of time is the board. And then depending on the club or the country that you happen to be in, you'll have either a chief executive or a president under that. And I guess his role or her role is to make sure that the plan of the board is implemented in the best way possible, and to manage all of the constituent parts that come into play. So, for example, if it's a stadium, to engage with developers, to planners, governmental bodies. So that it's really just that would be the side of it. And then depending on the club, sporting director, director of football, technical director. I think some clubs apply the wrong title to the wrong person, I think, because I've always traveled quite a bit, because I speak the languages. I've always done business in a lot of countries. My experience has been that your sporting director manages the succession plan of the entire club. He's the head of recruitment, and he coordinates all of the scouts, and really is the person responsible for making sure that they're not overloaded in one position and they're not underloaded in any position, and that they're always looking to bring in the best talents at the right time and looking to sell players at the right time. Again, in my experience, the technical director has been more of the coach of the coaches, making sure that, for example, your academy teams all of the coaches are doing the right things in the training session. The session contents are appropriate for each age group, and they've been distributed in the right amounts throughout the week. And as the age groups get older, there's maybe less technical work done and more tactical work done. So technical director, and I have seen certain clubs in the UK where the technical, who they call the technical director, is kind of doing what I would see the sporting director does, but each to their own. And director of football, for me, is really synonymous with sporting director. The kind of, I have seen a couple of occasions where somebody puts a director of football above a sporting director, which I guess in Germany they sometimes have. They have a sporting director and then they have a sporting CEO, which is not the CEO, it's the sporting CEO. And I think maybe that's director of football on certain occasions.
Good breakdown. What's been the biggest challenge of your career so far, and how did you overcome it?
So the biggest challenge of my career, definitely, it's a very obvious thing to say, maybe, was COVID. The whole lockdown period. When I first came to Roc Nation, we couldn't get into games for the best part of a year. So I spoke with Michael Yormark and I spoke with Nathan Campbell, so head of recruitment, and we decided that, the only way really to do this was to attack it and try to get the best out of the situation. So I think it was the start of lockdown, probably like everybody else, there was a novelty element to it, spending a lot of time at home, which was really a new experience because it'd been so busy for the last few years. But ultimately, I thought, well, we want to drive the business forward. We have to drive the business forward. So what can we do? So really what we did was put together a presentation that tried as close as possible to match a presentation you'd give a player if he came into the office. To be creative, you had to take meetings from distance, and then, when the regulations allowed for it, I sent a player in a forest. We lent the contract on his dad's back and signed it, because we were allowed to see each other from distance. We were allowed to meet outdoors in small group, but you weren't allowed to meet indoors. So you just had to be, I guess, in the end, it became like a little bit of a project for us. And we did really, really well during that period, which was, maybe unusual to be able to grow a business during a period like that, but we managed it.
Okay, interesting. I wasn't expecting that answer, to be fair, but I can imagine it's very difficult setting up an agency during COVID. Footballers and money is a big topic, right? And I don't know if you'd seen it, but we did an interview previously with Chris Robertson, who used to be at Chelsea. How do you deal with, young teenagers, young footballers in the current market becoming millionaires nearly overnight at times?
There's certain messages you try to get through to players. Firstly, those messages are a lot more implementable if he has the right people around him. So sometimes for a player, if he just has one bad egg hanging around him a lot, like a friend, say friend in inverted commas, it can really become a greater challenge than it should be. But ultimately, what we try to do with players is offer them some education, and what you're trying to get them in a position is, the position you're trying to get them into, rather, is when they're very young and they first get a big, hit of money for the first time. It could be a signing bonus or whatever it might be. They feel enormous power spending money. And what we try to flip it to is, spending it is actually easy. Any idiot can do that. Keeping the money, that's where the power is. And so what we try to do is, we have an expert who works alongside us, and, he starts from scratch. He teaches the players what interest is, what a mortgage is, what compound interest is. When players understand what compound interest is, they very often start to like saving. So what we do is, we can't impose this on players. So we will meet with players and the families and we'll say, look, we have certain suggestions. And it really revolves around saving. I'm also very cautious around financial advisors. There's some incredible ones, but there are ones who are really just sellers. And so if someone wants to meet a player, I'll try to get them on the phone, and you'll know in 3 minutes, and ultimately, with respect, if it's a 25-year-old guy who wants to speak to a player, high net worth, you haven't got anything to share with the guy. You're selling him something. So move on, So we're again, I think if you can start to really cultivate an understanding of saving and context. They know that they're playing football at the moment. They know what they make. They're also aware of more or less when the retirement age is, and also an understanding that you're one bad tackle away from really not playing anymore, and that contract could be the last contract. So you don't want players living in fear, or scare tactics don't tend to be very effective. It's education works better. So again, I think just keeping the money is what gives you options long term and gives you the power. Spending it is giving the power to others. The most common mistake for young players, I think, is, if I could change one thing about football, it would be, yeah, because there's a lot of people spoofing, dances on TikTok. There's other players who really should not do that.
For young people sort of watching this or looking to get into the football industry, whether that's, let's focus on agency for now. What advice do you have for them starting out in 2024? What would you do if you were starting out again now?
Yeah, so for anyone looking to get into agency, I'm going to start with the boring stuff. Learn your FIFA regulations and statutes, and learn your FA regulations and statutes, because you don't want to look like a dummy at any point. And going to a lot of games is essential. If you go to a game and you have a conversation with a player or somebody around a player, and they ask you a question, all the game, and you don't know the answer, all of these games that you've gone to are kind of for nothing. You've the rug's pulled from under you. And you'd be surprised how often it happens. They'll ask you a question on a point of a player's contract, or at what point he could move to another territory, whatever. There's any number of questions. And if you don't know the answer, then you've wasted that chance. You've got yourself into the position, and you haven't really been able to back it up. Again, I would say specialize as much as possible. Don't try to go to matches all over the place. Try to, fix and a schedule of games that's manageable. But you do need to go to a lot of games. And it's just a case of building knowledge. There isn't really a shortcut to it. If I had come directly from university and just been, become an agent, I would have been lacking so much context and knowledge. Still the same person, but without the experience, you wouldn't really have been able to do an effective job. So you got to understand that, again, the old cliche, the best way to get rich quick is to get rich slowly. There's an element of that to it. You have to really be patient, to be willing to be patient. If you rush it, it's probably not going to pan out very well. You just got to gather the knowledge, gather the contacts, watch the games, understand the players, understand the player that you may like, how he fits into the grand scheme of things. He's good, but how is he compared to Anderlecht's player in the same age group, in the same position? How is he compared to Luton Town's? How is he compared to Crystal Palace's? So it's good. It's always good to understand the player, and not just understand it, but understand where he stands and how he compares to others, his contemporaries.
Essentially, just encouraging people to be quite technical with the field, rather than...
Yeah, because there's a lot of people spoofing. There's a lot of people just talking. I get messages all the time from people, and there's a lot of people thinking, well, I love football, I'm great, so I'm going to be a great agent. And it doesn't really work like that. And they'd find out quickly enough. But I do think that when you do have a conversation with somebody and you can see they've done the work, and you can see that they're going to the games and they've got a really good knowledge, you think, well, they're prepared to do the job. There's a conversation to be had with this person. Whereas there are a lot of, I think it's a very attractive job, football agency. And if you speak to a lot of people and you say, would you like to be a football agent? The answer is yes. But it's a case of doing it well and knowing, just being armed to do your job, I guess. And that's what, it's quite rare when you do meet someone who knows their stuff and is going to a lot of games and knows the level of player, kind of, even if it's in one specific area. And I'm always happy to speak to people like that, wish them well, and give them a bit of, some pointers wherever possible. But it's, when you get this kind of ego approach from someone with very little knowledge, making my excuses and getting out of there.
Do you have any sort of general advice around business and entrepreneurship?
So for young people, non-specific to football, I would say more than ever, we're in a world of niches. So again, I would say specialize, be specific, as much as possible. But I think you are better if you look at the makeup of a lot of companies. They're like, for example, our company. When we're speaking with a client or a potential recruit, I can proudly and honestly say to them that they're surrounded by subject matter experts. So we've got a media expert, a social media expert, we've got a legal expert, and they all have strings to their bow that I don't have. And I guess a skill is knowing what you're good at, but what you're really not good at, and when to say this is the person you need to speak to. And so I think that for if you're moving into any field, even if you're going to university, I would say do something that's quite specific, something that you're drawn to, but it is quite, more and more it's becoming that way, that rather than a lot of people with quite general qualifications doing general things, successful organizations are usually made up of a dozen people, each of whom is really good in one specific area. So I guess that would be the thing I would say.
The game has changed a lot. Social media and the commercial angle of football has become far bigger over the last 5 years, let's say. How important is that sort of stuff off the pitch for footballers now? How important is that to you guys at the agency as well?
I think it's something that, when it's used well, it is very effective. I think for players, they shouldn't betray their personality. They should never really feel pressured into posting anything they're not comfortable with. And if they're not comfortable with it, don't just, I do think that if you're playing for a team, what you should probably realize is that 7-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 16-year-olds who adore that team, you're a hero of theirs. And so anything you put out there means something to them, even if it seems like something small. So I think that I always like when a player engages with social media, and I always like when they do it in a way that is consistent with their personality. And I think that there are certain players who could do, like, dances on TikTok, and that's perfectly authentic. It's part of their personality, and it goes down well. There's other players who really should not do that. It's not part of their personality. It's not. It just looks forced. I think again, because we live in an age of streaming, football on TV used to be on at a fixed time and you would watch it, or a movie or a TV series would be on at a fixed time and you had to find, make that place in your week to watch it. Whereas now it isn't like that. There's you can consume any media at any time. And I think things like Instagram are as important as TV. In fact, they're more direct. So people choose to follow a specific player. So as soon as they follow them, they want to see the content from that player. So I think it's a bit of a gift to the player. It's a privilege, and they should use it, really.
What are some of the most common mistakes, or the most common mistake you see young players make, that you advise against or try to help with?
The most common mistake for young players, I think, is, and sometimes with some of the better players, is they're kind of at the head of the field and they take their foot off the gas. That can happen, and it can happen a lot. And it really takes a particularly special and serious mindset for a player to hit the front and really want to see, how can I put more distance between me and the pack? And that's when you see the really elite players, that tends to be the way. They're not even focused on the pack. They're just focused on themselves getting better. So it's just a case of not getting complacent after a little bit of success. I think that's a mistake that you see time and time again. And I think that, an academy, because they wear the same shirt as the first team, can give players a little bit of a false sense that they've arrived. Even if you're playing in under 21s on a regular basis, still a lot of work to do. For some of the players will never get first team action, and even the best ones have a hell of a lot of work to do to make that step. So you cannot stop, you cannot rest. You've always got to be trying to improve. And I think another thing as well is you've got to be very honest with yourself. If you did a couple of good things in a game, that doesn't mean it was a great performance. And it's just a case of always trying to make sure that you're impacting every game. And if you're not, just rewind and have a look and see what can you do to help you do that. But I think avoid complacency and just keep pushing forward.
I've been in this world a long time. What have you learned about human nature and people with all the different people that you work with?
Yeah. So in this job, in terms of what I've learned about people, it's that none of us are really very different at all. I've watched football in every corner of the earth, and it's the same conversations, just in a different language. Um, you've got the good and the bad, mostly good. Um, but overall, I think that the global football communities, I'm privileged to work in it, and it's I enjoy every day of my job.
You're obviously a linguist. Um, how important has it been speaking other languages in your career so far?
The ability to speak languages has really helped me a lot in my job. Um, I would say, as an independent, it probably gave me a massive advantage over other independents. It's safe to say that bigger agencies probably had someone who could speak Spanish and someone who could speak French, whereas as an independent, it got me a lot of work from clubs and just traveling. It's a hugely beneficial thing to have. You go to a game in Spain and you can speak directly, nothing lost in translation. The same in Italy, the same in France. So for me, it's great. I mean, and you don't, I think people sometimes think, oh, I didn't learn it as a kid. You're like a sponge when you're that age. I kind of disagree. I mean, yes, that is true, but it's not a cop out for learning a language. I think as an adult, you can understand better what you're going to use it for. And so if you start to learn a language, if you're serious about it, you could do well. And you're not trying to become another nationality. You're trying to just learn the language. And even if you can learn a little, it goes a long way. People respect it when you're in the country, and if you can actually become proficient at it, huge advantage.
We've spoken a lot about as an agent working with players, but I think something that like the public aren't too exposed to is agents working on behalf of clubs. Can you explain that to us and how that works in the real world?
So agents working for clubs is pretty common. I mean, a way it might manifest is you may have a championship club have a player from Turkey. The player's agent is Turkish based. The club may not wish to keep the player. The player's agent might not have the biggest network outside of Turkey. So the club may speak to an agent or a couple of agents and say, look, we really want to sell this player. If you can assist. So, I mean, that's a pretty commonplace way. But no, I think agents play an important role in the market generally, and kind of keep the market moving, really. And as an independent, I was probably doing about probably 30% for clubs, 70% for players. Roc Nation, we probably do similar.
Where do you see the future of football going in the next few years?
I think it's only growing. It's only growing further. There's an argument to say that the way people consume it might differ. You may have a younger generation who might not watch 90 minutes, might watch highlights, and might specifically follow their favorite player wherever he moves rather than being loyal to a particular badge. Um, but I think you'll still have enough people supporting teams. And I think, if you look at the U.S., they've got Copa America this summer. They've got the Club World Cup 25, and they've got the World Cup in 26. So, and you also, at the same time, you have so many populations and like demographics in America of countries where football is the biggest sport. And so I think in some ways, even if you did nothing, football would be growing in America, because you've got people from Colombia and you've got people from Senegal and you've got people from everywhere where football is adored. But because there's also these tournaments and there's a lot of work going on, um, I think North America, it's really going to take off. Also, the talent in terms of the young American players, I would say around the 2002 born generation and younger, when we started to see like a really big difference, the 2002s. Um, the fact that there are so many good players, it means that the young kids are going to have players to look up to. So instead of looking up to just overseas players, there's going to be a lot of American players to look up to and to want to emulate. So I think that will grow. Other parts of the world, it's difficult for it to grow anymore because it's so big already. It's like a religion in certain countries, and I think that'll be the same. The biggest change is maybe, as I say, the way people consume it, as in watch it, and the way people actually, the fan experience, is it a transitory thing, or when a player moves, their affiliation moves? You like to think that's very isolated, that it's just at any one time maybe 2 or 3 world-changing players that might apply to, rather than anybody else. I still think, we're going to be here for the long run, I think.
If you could change one thing about the football industry, what would you change and why?
If I could change one thing about football, it would be probably around the academy system, because one of my daughters goes to drama class. She goes twice a week. She doesn't have any great expectation that she's going to win an Oscar or even perform on Broadway or anything close to that. She does it because she loves it. And a lot of the starting point of academy players is they love it and they go. And I think that the chances of them, it's been well documented, the chances of anyone coming through are relatively small. Now, a lot of time that's pushed back on the clubs. It's like, you chew these kids up and you spit them out. But a lot of the times it's difficult to be harsh on the clubs. It's the expectation that's built. And it isn't very often the club that builds the expectation, by the way. So I think that what would be useful is a system whereby you could say above, from 14 onwards, perhaps, the exact parameters to be determined. But when a player is renewed for a year by a club, they put £2,000, for example, into a trust for the player. And they do that each year. And if a player then, again, to be determined, for example, 22 years of age and is not in the game anymore, he then can use that for educational purposes and retrain. But I think that, if you've got 20 kids in an age group and you're paying 2,000 into a trust each year, 40,000, it's not a massive investment, but the player 6 or 7 years later needs that money. It makes a huge difference at the right time for quite a small investment. So I think that very often I don't really condemn clubs, because I think it's like any profession. Only the really best ones will get through, and that's the reality of it. But they could maybe do a little bit more in that respect for life after football. And listen, some clubs are amazing. You get clubs players who are maybe 30 years of age and they're still helping them out where they can and directing them. There's some great work going on at some Premier League clubs and Championship clubs in particular. But a little bit more could be done maybe.
What does the future hold for yourself and for Roc Nation?
Honestly, really excited about, I think we've achieved a lot in 3.5 years. And we moved into Brazil last year. That's already been, it's been very successful for us as a business. We had 5 players in the Brazil squad the other night. We would have had 6, but Gabriel Martinelli was injured. So I think that the way forward for us is, as we've done so far, keep it exclusive, high level of service for the clients, subject matter experts for everything that the player could possibly need in his life, professionally, on pitch or off pitch, and just moving into territories that are not necessarily saturated and where we feel a need for our services. So, for example, Brazil was a very transactional territory. There was a lot of transfers out of Brazil, but there wasn't a lot of love for the players that were transferred out. In some cases, they were moved, deal done, agent moves on, and player is left to fend for himself. Not always, but it was quite high frequency. What we wanted to do, and one of the reasons we liked Fred Penn and his partners, was they had the follow-up service. They built it when they had a player who was doing well. They built a team around the player. And for us, we've been able to assist and expand what they're doing. And it's been a great addition to our business. So going forward, we'll do a little bit more North America, a little bit more Brazil, and 2024, a couple of other European territories we'll move into as well.
Exciting stuff to come.
I hope so.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.